all, this is RP Matt, and today I'm going to talk about my experience as an American expat living in London. I moved here about 6 months ago with my company, and it feels like it has made me grow in many different areas. I have learned a lot about many things, but most importantly, I've learned a lot about myself, and I wanted to take this time to share some of my observations from being here. So first, how did I end up here? Well, my company sent me here on a skilled worker visa as part of a rotational program. So I'm here with a role in my company. When I was looking at jobs outside of college, I was very much looking for companies and roles that had positions abroad. I work in finance, so quite a few that had them. It's just a matter of getting the right ones. So this has been a goal of mine to move abroad since at least freshman year in college, probably sooner, to be honest. After a few years at my company, I asked if I could rotate, and luckily for me, they said yes. So I've been here now for about 6 months. Learned a lot about the area and especially about myself and kind of how I think, I guess, and how I react to certain things. I think working at a company and then getting a visa through that is probably the easiest way, although definitely not the quickest. And I say it's the easiest because you can typically keep your normal salary and move over with them and maybe even keep the same job and all the connections you've made. There are other similar visas available for healthcare workers or students, or sometimes just students of certain universities elsewhere. You can check out my blog post in the link below for some more information on that. I've done more of a detail on how to actually get over here. London truly can be a magical city. Walking through the street and seeing these buildings that are just beautiful and hundreds of years old and filled with history, and seeing plaques of saying Jimi Hendrix lived here, Voltaire lived here, and things like that it really makes you stop and think about the gravity of the place that you're living. You definitely don't get that where I came from, which is Texas. Some of the buildings, even the building I live in, is probably almost as old as the state that I was in back then. So, So that doesn't even mention all the coffee shops, cozy pubs, great free museums. You'd really have to try hard to run out of things to do here. And I personally have not even scratched the surface in my 6 months here. There's plenty of West End shows, plenty of musicians that have come through here and continue to come through here on tours. Same with comedians. So almost anybody that you want to see on tour, probably they're coming to London at some point. I'd be lying if I said I didn't love the fact that walking down the street and just randomly seeing a plaque, like I mentioned before, marking the home of Voltaire, that's just awesome to me. So day-to-day life looks a little bit different than it did when I was in Texas. The most obvious thing is, in Texas, I needed a car to do anything. That's just a necessity. Here, I don't have a car. I get around on foot. I take the bus, take the tube. Before I moved here, I definitely romanticized the idea of public transport. And I think now that I've been here, I still prefer it in most cases, day to day, especially going out at night or, just going out for the day to go see museums and things like that. And you can be a little more flexible and you're not carrying around a car, sitting in traffic. I think as far as rush hour, it's not that much better because rush hour, you're sitting in your car, you're in traffic on the road. That kind of sucks. Rush hour here, you're sitting on the tube, you got people all up in your face, all up in your business. I think that rush hour is kind of a wash, but every other instance, I would say generally I like the tube. You definitely do have to be more intentional about your days here and planning them, because unlike when you have a car, you have to carry your whole day with you, right? So if you go to the gym, if you take a lunch to work, you got to take all that with you. It's not quite as easy as just throwing it in the back seat and being on your way. So I do like that about driving a car, but overall, this is much more. It feels much more free in a weird way. I also think that workplaces tend to be much more social here. So I think to some extent that's because nobody's driving to and from work. So it's, for one thing, if everyone's going to drink, nobody's drinking and driving. Another thing is just the pub's right outside the office, so you might walk by on your way to the bus station or the train station, and you and your coworker might just say, "Hey, let's grab a beer." And so, I probably walk by 4 or 5 pubs in my 10-minute walk home to the bus. So that's one thing that helps make the workplace more social. I also think that vacation time is obviously more ample here, so the minimum is 28 days. And that goes for everybody versus, most people in the U.S. might get 2 weeks. Some people will get 3 or 4 weeks, but most people are, 2 weeks. And in some cases, you don't get any if you're maybe a service worker. So another thing is just the culture around taking it. People are encouraged to use all of their vacation here, and they're very open about doing so. So I do like that a lot. You don't ever feel like you're bothering anybody by asking to go on vacation, or just saying, you don't even really have to ask here. You just kind of say, I'm going to take off this week or this week here, as long as you have someone to help with cover your job. The flip side to this is much lower pay. So I found that a position in the U.S., at least in my job, could pay as much as double what they pay for the people here, and I don't fully know why that is. I think a lot of it has to do with the different government responsibilities that employers have. So, they have to help subsidize retirement and healthcare at a higher cost than we do back in the States. Other than that, I really haven't fully figured it out because it is much more expensive to pay rent here. As far as prices go, rent is definitely the worst thing. I think that the restaurants and the drinks are fairly comparable to a major U.S. city. That's not to say I actually think it's a little bit cheaper than New York when you're going out. Any other U.S. city, it's probably about the same, maybe a little more. I think the grocery store, compared to what I was paying in Texas, is roughly the same, actually maybe a little bit cheaper, especially when you factor in the quality of the food that you're getting. They have really great produce here, good meat. I think they have much less ingredients, they have many more ingredients that are banned. So you don't have to be as scrutinous if you're worried about what's in your food, because a lot of the things that we have that aren't good are just not allowed here, basically. So one thing that I haven't used, and I won't speak on too much, is the NHS. Obviously, they have public health care here. From what my coworkers have told me, it's kind of a lottery. You could live in a really good postcode and have a really good doctor, or you could live in a postcode where you might have to wait a long time or just have bad service. So it really just depends on where you live. But basically, the doctor and the hospital you go to is dependent on where you live. And then it comes out of your paycheck, every month. But when you show up, it's free or next to free. Like I said, I haven't had to use that much in my 6 months here, thankfully. But it is different than, it's definitely cheaper than the U.S., in my opinion, because in the U.S. I was paying, to go to the doctor, I was paying $200 or $300 a month for the insurance, and then I could pay up to $20,000 in a year if I had a really bad incident, which thankfully I didn't. But just having that over you requires more of a financial cushion than you would really need here. Probably the biggest difference here is the flats. Flats, that we call them apartments in the U.S. Here they're called flats. They're usually quite small. Maybe not if you're coming from New York, but if you're coming from, definitely from Texas. And they're used very differently than we're used to. So many of them do have dishwashers, and almost all of them have a washing machine. The washing machine oftentimes will have a dryer built in, but not all the time. So for example, in our house, we don't have a dryer, our flat. So we have to hang dry everything. We have a drying rack. Sometimes you'll see people hanging out the window, or maybe they'll have a clothesline if they have a yard. For us, it's just the drying rack inside. So that's very different. Another thing is the washing machine is usually in the kitchen, which is a bit odd. Sometimes it'll be hidden, sometimes not really. But there's obviously no laundry room, so there's that. And then another thing that the flats don't have here is air conditioning. So that one I think is pretty well known. A few of them do, but mostly not really. And even when they have heat, it's not central heat. It's usually a radiator. And so essentially there's a boiler that heats up water, and the radiator will take that heat and disperse it. I really like the radiator system because instead of forcing dusty, stuffy air, it's just heat coming off from the water. So I don't know if it's as efficient necessarily, but I do like the way it feels better in our flat. Obviously, people make a lot of jokes about the food and the weather here, including the British people. They make a lot of jokes about it as well. It's kind of a very self-deprecatory humor here, or self-deprecating, I guess. The weather is poor most of the time. At least, I got here in September, so I kind of missed the summer, but it's often gray, it's often rainy, and it can be quite dark in the winter. I think at the peak of darkness, it's like 7.5-hour days. So, you get to work, it's dark, you leave work, it's dark. And, honestly, sun will set at like 3:30, and you're kind of just sitting in your office thinking, did I work late today? And, it's only 3:30. So that's different. I think the food is definitely an overblown meme at this point. I think the food, at least in London, is very good. I could see outside London being a little bit more bland for sure, but within London, you can basically get, depending on almost any category of food, I'd say you could find a restaurant that's an 8 out of 10, maybe a 7 out of 10, but still pretty close. I've had barbecue here, I've had Mexican food here, I've had Italian food, Indian food, Thai food, Vietnamese, you name it. With that being said, sometimes it's a bit more expensive than other places. So I know definitely the Mexican food is more expensive than what I would pay for in Texas. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you think about it, but yeah, and I think even the pub food here is really good. It's a very hearty type of cuisine. Usually it's obviously there's fish and chips, but then if you don't like that, there's steak pie. There's a lot of kind of stew type food. Usually the burgers are okay, chicken fingers, things like that. So it's kind of plain dishes, but it's good quality in my opinion. And usually it's just a lot of meat and veggies. If you're here on a Sunday, you can book a Sunday roast at a pub. It's literally just a roast beef or pork or chicken, but roast beef, veggies, gravy, Yorkshire pudding. It's actually really good. It goes well with beer. One thing I've noticed culturally, there's a little bit of a tall poppy syndrome here. So, people are kind of afraid to stand out, I think, a little bit more than the US. And, people don't like to fall out of line with the norms. Sometimes if you do that, they'll talk down at you or look down at you. I haven't really experienced that necessarily, but I've seen it. And I've heard a lot of that from, some of my coworkers in particular. I think in the US, we have a little bit more of a maverick culture still. That's not to say that every English person is, just mass conformist, and definitely not every American is a Jimi Hendrix or some kind of rebel like that. But, I think that's definitely, the balance is tilted a bit compared to in the US, so that's different. The most interesting thing about this move is just been the things I've learned about myself. So, getting out of my comfort zone and being here has allowed me to reflect on a lot of things. When I first got here, I remember feeling mostly capable of everything, just setting things up. It wasn't that different than setting up when you move apartments in the US, for example, or get a new phone. Things like that were pretty normal. I do remember a couple times just feeling like I made the wrong decision, or just, felt like this was the first time doing everything. And in a way it kind of was, but I don't know where that feeling stemmed from necessarily, other than obviously moving across the ocean. But I feel like when I think about it logically, it was pretty similar to what I would have done in the US. So, but I do remember my initial gut reaction being kind of just like feeling dumb in a lot of days, the first couple of weeks especially. So I have realized, being here, how much I value my friends and family, especially my parents. So, I definitely took for granted being able to go home 3 or 4 times a year and see my family. I also have a great group of friends in the US. So, I'm working on building a great group of friends here, but I definitely feel the distance some days. And, that's something I kind of knew, but you don't really know how much it affects you until you go through it, I guess. And, I knew roughly how I'd handle being away from extended family, but I wasn't really sure being away from my parents. And I mean, I definitely value being able to go home and see them more often than I am here anyway. Probably here it's once a year or once every couple of years is what it's kind of looking like. So, that's something I've definitely learned. Another thing that was interesting when I started to move here is I started to feel weirdly extra American, like extra patriotic almost. I think I was just appreciating things that are uniquely American more than I have before. This feeling's kind of subsided the longer I've been here. But, for example, when I moved here, I just really had the urge to go on a big road trip, right? And just be on the open road and the highways of America. And, I think that's something that's kind of unique to the US. I think, there's probably a lot of places in maybe Africa or something, for example, that are like that. But, Europe's very dense in comparison. So I initially felt the impacts of that, and just like less personal space, and obviously don't have a car, which is cool. But at the same time, I love road trips. So then it was just like a weird reaction. But, some of these things come from a place of just craving familiarity when I'm experiencing all these new things, some of these feelings. And some of them I think are legitimate that I just kind of didn't realize I had. So that's been really interesting to go through. And I think there's a term for it, but I can't remember what it's called. But it's essentially when people move abroad and they become somewhat oddly nationalistic about their own country. Um, so yeah, that's a bit weird. I think not being in the U.S. Another thing too is you realize that the U.S. has its problems, but so does everybody else. And we definitely have a unique problem set. They have a somewhat similar problem set here, but I'd say with a few very big ones not being issues, and people are just more in agreement on them. But they definitely have, the whole political chasm is growing, and different debates on immigration and things like that. So that's been interesting. And then obviously, like I mentioned before, the economy is much different here. I feel like it's much harder to get ahead if you're a young person in the UK. Um, and so I feel like that's kind of showing, and you're seeing a lot of people trying to leave to go to places like, Dubai is a popular place to go from here, or Southeast Asia, places that are cheap or low taxes, because the tax rate here is quite ludicrous, especially on top of the lower pay. So for an American, that can be kind of a shock at first, depending on what your job is, anyway. Another thing that I've kind of learned is somewhat unique about the U.S. is, at least where I was in Texas, you could realistically afford in a middle class job to get a house. Probably a 2-bedroom, if not like a 4 or 5-bedroom, depending on what you wanted. And I always kind of thought that a lot of these houses were a little bit goofy. Like, I'm not a big fan of having a McMansion and 2 Chevy Tahoes and 4,000 square feet for a family of 4. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, obviously people, you do you, but for me, I never really thought I wanted that. But at the same time, the alternative here is not only there's like lower pay, but then also it might cost you £1 million to do to have a small flat like the one I live in. And so coming from Texas, where you could get a nice house for $250,000 to $500,000 to what the market's like here, it's kind of interesting to see how much easier it is to get on the property ladder in much of the U.S. Obviously, like there's places like New York, places like Boston, San Francisco that it's like nearly impossible, or at least a similar level of impossibility as here. But I think there's a lot more places in the U.S. that, if that's your goal, you can kind of go make it happen, right? It just might take some flexibility. And then finally, I'm kind of learning more about what I want out of my career. So, I mean, being here without friends or family, and to some extent less of my hobbies, work carries a lot more weight in terms of my personal happiness formula, or lack thereof in some cases, right? So when I go back and forth in the job, being here with the company has kind of made me feel a little bit more trapped. Obviously I'm not actually trapped, but, I definitely gave the company a little bit of my independence by allowing them to be the ones that sent me here. So that's been interesting to kind of experience, and just, it feels a bit weird. And it's to some extent made me less satisfied at work. Like, I think when you have more control over your own personal life and circumstances, you can kind of approach work that way, and just kind of, you can say no to things you don't want as much or whatever. And I think here there's a little bit more pressure to kind of do those things because I'm here on this great opportunity. So, that's not even necessarily pressure from the company, but also pressure I've put on myself. So, at the end of the day, I just want to maximize my time freedom and my location freedom, which will take time. Obviously, you got to build up to a position where you can do that. But I think this has just kind of accelerated that awareness of what I actually want. I think most people kind of want some element of that, but I probably didn't need to come here to figure that out. But I definitely, like I said, I think it accelerated that awareness, and gave me a little bit more a boost of confidence to go out and work hard to get those things. So I'm happy with that. So all in all, I'm really happy that I made this move. I'll say before I came, I was pretty sure that I was never going to want to leave. I think even only 6 months in, I can pretty easily say that I am okay going back to the States whenever that happens. I definitely think that I could probably do a couple years here, but it's not permanent like I thought maybe it would be. I just don't see my whole future playing out here. But I'm definitely glad I did it, because if I hadn't, I would have always had that what if kind of pang in the back of my head. Like, what if I had done that? What if I had moved there? And so I think, if you have an opportunity like this, you definitely should take it and just experience it, even if it's only for a year or two. It may be a difficult year or two. It may be easy, but at least you'll have done it and you'll have learned, and you can take the things that you learn here and kind of mix them in with your life when you get back home. But yeah, being here has kind of made me appreciate the way that the fact that so many people live differently, and I can take those lessons and kind of meld them into my own life. If you're one of the 20% of people who YouTube says watches all the way to the end of the video, then I'd just like to say thank you for watching, and please check out in the link below. I have a blog post on a similar subject, but it's kind of more of a practical how-to. So if this is something that sounds interesting to you, maybe you want to move to the UK as an American, I think that blog post can be helpful. And then, please feel free to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments if you've had a similar experience or what if you have any questions about my experience so far, and I'd be happy to answer them. So, all right, thanks for watching.